Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. You are about to join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Welcome to episode 88, May 22nd, 2020. The journey of motherhood from birthing life to birth loss and surrogacy, a real life story. Stories from real people about life, birth, death, and the beautiful, inspiring, and motivating. I have a special guest. Her name is Christine Robenalt. She's a wife, mom, working professional. She also would describe herself as a modern medicine woman who tries to stay connected to her body. Christine teaches in person as well as online about mindfulness, meditation, breathwork, and sensory motor integration, in order to guide parents and children to support and stretch with ease towards the desired outcome. Hi, Christine. How are you? I know we hear a little puppy there, maybe a big dog barking away.
Oh, my gosh. I apologize. I try to keep them quiet. There are two big dogs.
Oh, two big. I'm trying to be kind, like little puppies. But yeah, they sound, hopefully their energy won't psychically invade the space. I just feel like animals are very psychic. But thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. Yes, during this part of the month right now, as we're at home and doing virtual school and everybody's working at home, I think the dogs are also feeling a little bit stressed. But yeah, hopefully they will stay quiet for us to talk.
Yeah, so I would love to, I know I always kind of go over when I have guests, like where we kind of connected. I think we connected in a podcast group, and I think that's where it was, where I was kind of asking, because I'd love to share more real life stories, and Christine had this, has actually an amazing background of all these different, from the physical therapist to the energetic of Reiki. But I do want to hear, your story going from, you have earth children, and by earth children, somebody asked me that the other day, what does that mean? Earth children means they're here on earth. And you've also experienced really substantial birth loss, and you were also a surrogate. I'd love to hear a little bit about these different parts of your journey into motherhood.
Absolutely. So I think, one of my lifelong dreams and ambitions was to always have children. I am the oldest of two, and, I always wanted to have that experience as well as a mother and having my own children. So as soon as we graduated college and was able to get out on our own, I really wanted us to get pregnant, and my husband didn't want that for us at first. So that was a little bit of a frustration. And during that time, I think I really, I caused myself a lot of anxiety, just having that difference between what he wanted for us and what I wanted. So that was difficult. But during that time, I did do some egg donations. I figured, if I cannot use these right now, I could donate them to somebody else. And I always laugh at this point, my gosh, this was 2004. So there would be a little girl or a little boy potentially walking around with half of my DNA right now. And just the thought of that really was, that I was able to help that family. So that's where part of my birthing and mothering journey began. We went on to have some complications, and in 2016 I did get pregnant with our first child, only to learn that her frontal wall didn't close, and went for the level 2 ultrasound, and the radiologist was looking at the image on the large screen in front of us and said that she was incompatible with life. And right now I'm imaging in my head, lying there on the table, watching my daughter on screen there. She looked like a little jackknife in the sense that I knew even at that point that babies shouldn't look like that. So she had no frontal wall, and they really didn't give me an option to continue with the pregnancy. It was pretty much, did you want to do a D&C or did you want to deliver her? And she was 18 weeks. And I just did not feel right about doing the D&C. So it was my choice, and my husband was supportive of me, that we would go in and have the delivery, which was hard because my body didn't want to give her up at 18 weeks of gestation. But we went through the process, and I did deliver her vaginally. And we got to sit and hold her, which she was incredibly small, 18 weeks, not viable on her own at that stage. But she was able to fit in the palm of our hand. And the nurses were phenomenal, and I couldn't have asked for a better experience than the nursing staff and everybody there. But that was our first birthing experience, and really kind of set. Yeah, I think, looking at it now, I find that talking about it, and even in 2006 and 2007, that the more I talked about it, the more I gave myself permission to get out those words and feelings and emotions, the better it got. And I guess that's something that I think everybody has to decide for themselves when you go through a tragedy or a loss like that. How do you work through that? But for me, it was definitely sharing my story helped me so much. So that's
I love,
started that.
I love how you're able to find your kind of own inner connection with it, like the way you grieve, the way, it is a hard place, I hear, for women that have, if baby's not compatible with life, like what are the options? And I know some women that have gone through procedures, and I've also known women that have waited and birthed. And it's, there's not one way to do it, I feel like, and that I feel like is so important. And the choice that you have to make to go, how is this going? What way is this going to kind of unfold? And you're just kind of in it. And I do feel like it's helpful for people to hear, that connection that you have, for you, it was about birthing and being able to hold and being able to create, whatever ritual or ceremony, and even probably they're still honoring, but you said it was your first birth experience too. So how did that set it up for the rest of your other pregnancies and births? Did it feel, of course it's going to feel like nerve-wracking, but besides that, but like how were you able to work through that in that time?
Yes, I tried to make that not happen again. So, meaning I tried to exert as much control over the situation as possible, and that backfired. I couldn't understand how relaxing, so we had a really hard time getting pregnant the second time. And, you go through all these tests and try to figure out what's going on and what's wrong with me. And then I came across a couple of books that led me more toward Eastern medicine and more breath work and Qigong. I did also receive my Reiki, my level 1 Reiki attunement at that time too, and started to slowly experience that the control I was trying to exert over my body and the universe was futile. Resistance will always be met with resistance. And I was resisting really hard, and I think that was what was going on for that period of time. And it's so hard in the moment to kind of conceptualize how giving up control actually allows you to move the needle forward. But once I did come to that realization, there wasn't a struggle anymore, and we got pregnant. And he was a healthy baby boy, and we moved on from there. So
then you had 2 more children after that?
Yeah. So then we had the second one that was 4 years away from the first, which was, I don't know, maybe a little bit further away than I wanted, but actually a really nice space of being able to have those first 4 years with my first son, and then him being a little bit older and understanding what the addition of another sibling meant and how much he could help me. And I really, looking at it now, obviously you do what you need to do no matter what the birth order is or how much space in between. But then the second two were only 2 years apart, and that was much more challenging. One, I had 3 children, and 2, just the sibling rivalry. And right now they are almost 6 and 8 years old right now, and they still have that intense sibling rivalry, as opposed to the 4 year gap doesn't quite have that same level of position and power over the others. And I did a lot of work with Adlerian psychology as far as birth order and level of importance, and thinking about that. And that was quite a journey too, because as a new mom, even with my first, trying to kind of figure out that control piece and trying to figure out discipline and how to really listen to my child. And I tell my oldest son that, I really apologize for some of the things that I tried. I just didn't know any better, as far as maybe some spanking or, some parenting strategies that were less than effective. And again, it was all about control and how that just created more a resistance and not really meeting my son where he was at the moment and acknowledging the strengths and the good things. But I think that first experience with my first son really then helped me set myself up to know what I wanted to do differently with my next 2. And of course, you're always learning every day as new things come up. But then as I moved more into like learning about meditation and being able to kind of figure out what my strengths and weaknesses were as a mom and where my anxieties lay, helped me really, truly, the meditation helps with that a lot, to be able to create space between the impulse and the action. And then that moves directly right into what I work with the children that I work with as a physical therapist. And so I really see it all just kind of connecting the experiences I had as a young mom and as I progressed, and just learning how to help other parents better experience this whole journey of parenting, because it's not easy, and you have to be okay with being uncomfortable sometimes and not always being in control, and that has been quite a process for me to move through.
I know that there's a lot of people that tune in conception and pregnancy, even birth loss, and even some parenting is too. As I hear you speaking, even about the birth order, or how do I then become a greater, better parent than my parents? I feel like we all do that. And you just, when you're saying that, it makes me think like, oh gosh, what happens to the firstborns? Because they're like the testers to all the other kids. And I joke about that because I grew up as a middle child, so I'm like, oh, okay, I only know mom and dad with another. But the older one is like, what are you doing here? It's like I'm all about mom and dad are mine. But even, so you shared a little bit about, it's interesting, I do hear that with the conception struggle, of course there's so much energy involved in loss, and you talk about, the releasing of the control, or what was the word you used? Is it resilience is met, what is the word you used? With something with an R, met with the other, like you're like almost pushing
resistance.
Against each other. Yeah, resistance. I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. It's like, yeah, resistance, like, and how to let go into it. And I want to know is, then where did surrogacy come in? What is that piece for too? Like, how did that come into your life and felt so connected to do?
Yes, I think after I had done the egg donation and then experienced the loss of Marie, we did name her Marie. I felt like I really needed to I don't know, honor her in some way. And I felt like at the time I was 39, and you can no longer be a surrogate for most companies after the age of 42. So I was kind of at the end. We didn't want to have any more children of our own, but yet I was still young enough to be, to participate and to try to help another family out. So my husband and I, we talked about it, and he said, this is your choice. No one's making you do this. But I applied, and I was actually rejected by the first company because of my experience with Marie, and also because my husband and I had gone to some counseling, and which I think is kind of funny that they were penalizing me for reaching out and getting some help for us as a relationship. They saw that as a negative. But then I just thought, well, you know what, I'm going to try with one other company and we'll see. And again, let's just put it out there. And within 12 hours of having my application in with that particular company and my profile up, I was chosen by a same-sex couple in England. And we met with them for a Skype call, and they liked me, and then we liked them, so we agreed.
Oh, nice.
And I don't know, it was just kind of something like I felt I had the capacity to do this. My pregnancies and births were not difficult. I birthed children very well.
Nice, yeah.
So
what did you? So I know I met a birth doula who is a surrogate. It's the only one I've ever met in person, but I have had clients that are either in surrogacy or looking to do surrogacy. And I remember I said, like, there's a certain language around surrogates, like, so when you gave your baby away, it's like, no, you don't say that. It's not yours. You're like the borrowed womb is what I would call it.
Yeah.
And so this child is, their child. And I'm sure I know that there's a deeper spiritual and soul agreement that, goes even into other places around that. And I do want to hear more around, so what did they receive a daughter or son? How does that, what was this, and how old is this child now? And do you connect with that child?
Yes. So it's a little boy, and they live in London, and we do Skype with each other. I don't know, maybe every 2 months or so we have since he was born. They stayed here for 6 weeks. They stayed here in Boulder, Colorado, and I was able to babysit him a couple of times as the dads went out and did some errands. So that was really nice to have that time. I think that the dads and my husband and I and my family, we've invited them over for dinner. So even though they live in London, when they were here for those 6 weeks, we tried to spend as much time together as was comfortable for both of us. But we had them over for dinner multiple Sundays. He's 18 months now, so he's doing very well, walking and talking some. And the dads are just over the moon to have him. And he's obviously not any part of my DNA, but I did carry him for 9 months, and we had that connection. I would actually say that I was a little bit more anxious, especially in the beginning of the pregnancy, about my appointments, only because I really wanted to get this right. I felt a strong duty and obligation to these dads that they were counting on me to deliver them their baby, and I just really wanted to do the best job possible. So I don't know, I took it pretty seriously as far as trying to stay healthy, although I was pregnant during the summer, so I had a lot of Auto Pops, probably way too much sugar for that little guy.
Good.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to say anything.
Oh, no, I would love to hear even a little bit more of your experience around what would be the advice as, you're the surrogate. Like, what is when you are a surrogate, are you meditating? Are you looking at your psychological wellness? I know it's very physical. Do you kind of have is there a certain thing that comes into that? Like, do you know what I mean by that? Like, what does that look
Sure.
like? Because I can understand, I mean, it's still in your body. It's a part of you because it's in your body. So it's like you can't really separate that. But how do you then nourish it in a way that just, yeah. So what is the emotional and spiritual piece of that for you in that time?
Yes, I think, I mean, obviously, you need, with no matter what you do, whether it's your job or parenting or a hobby that you have, two things need to be true. One, you need to really want to do it, like a motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you need to know that you can. At some level, you have to have a knowledge that you can do this. And so if you're going into this surrogacy, if you're trying to think if you want to be a surrogate, like I would kind of reflect a little bit and ask yourself some questions about, what are my motivations for wanting to do this? Is it just monetary, which you do get compensated monetarily, or is there like a higher connection or meaning for you? And I think if it's solely monetary wise, it will be kind of challenging for you, because if you divided it out, how much money you're getting per minute that you're holding onto this baby in the birth, and potentially loss of time from your own job or loss away from family, it's not very, it's something like maybe 26 cents, I don't know, a minute or something like that. So it's really, you can't just do it solely for that. So I think if you have a bigger connection, that can definitely help even when it's tough. And then just as you're moving through the process, like as with anything, be very cognizant in your body of where these sensations and feelings are happening. Like early on when we were going to hear his heartbeat, I had a lot of anxiety over that first appointment, and just trying to sit back and I think when we're talking about somatic experiencing and somatic awareness of where you're feeling emotions in your body, you're not needing to analyze like why you're feeling these emotions or why you're feeling this sensation, but rather just acknowledging that they're there. And it's like if you were, Tara Brach is a psychologist and an author. She has a book called Radical Acceptance, and in that book she talks about meeting these sensations and feelings as if you were meeting a friend on a park bench. Even if you didn't really like that person you were meeting, you still would sit next to that person. You would still acknowledge that person, have the conversation that you need to have. You don't need to really understand that person. Just be present with it. Because that's where what allows you to move forward and allows you to release any sort of difficulties that you might be having with the issue, rather pushing it. If you push it away, that's that resistance piece. If your resistance against feeling something, it's not going to go away. You might ignore it for a while, but acknowledging it, recognizing it, and for me, that kind of happened naturally. And luckily, I didn't have a whole lot of challenging feelings during that time. I knew from the beginning that my main focus was to help this other family out, and that helped me through some of those times. I always kind of go back to that, what's my passion and purpose about this, and that I was able to move through any sort of difficult emotion. I never really felt like, oh, why me, or oh gosh, I'm still pregnant, or I accepted the difficulties, because that's a part of being pregnant, is you're going to have pain, you're going to have discomfort. So I think for me, just to kind of accept and acknowledge that this is part of the process was helpful. You mentioned some other things that I might have done. I think, again, like whether you're getting pregnant for yourself or if you're a surrogate, your body is like that garden. And this is what I learned from the Eastern medicine approach is, what are the things that you're going to do to nourish that soil, to nourish that environment for growing that baby. And so that's whether you're talking about nutrition, your sleep, your exercise, meditation. I mean, these are things that all of us should be doing anyway. And sometimes if we don't see a value to it, we may not be making time for it in our lives. But especially now as you're trying to grow a new being, I think it is to the best of your ability to really think about all the factors that make up that garden to really give that baby the best environment to grow and to thrive. And also acknowledge that you can't. It's not saying that you're going to control everything, but you're just, acknowledging I'm going to do the best that I can today to provide that baby with a good, healthy environment.
So thank you. There's so much, just listening to this wave of energy around you. It's like moving into conception, having to birth loss really, and having to grieve, and then moving into all these other pregnancies, and then surrogacy, and then your work, it's like, I'm sure was just built up through all this energy. Maybe you did it before, maybe I'm not really sure, but I know you said here that you're a pediatric physical therapist, certified in infant massage instruction, and you even talk about the love language for infants and child massage sensory. I guess that's a thing, I don't know. And then level 1 Reiki, which makes sense. You have level 1 Reiki, which is like your attunement, you're aware of energy. And I would love to also hear about, I had to Google it, MNR Eye. And I was like, what is that? That sounds fascinating. It sounds like you do it in even postnatally, prenatally. I'm not really sure what that's about. But I'd love to hear more about, like, did you start your work before or in the middle of, like, when did that all kind of come together for you?
Right. So I was a physical therapist. I graduated in 2001, and I had worked in a variety of practice settings, not necessarily only in pediatrics, because it was kind of tough where I was living to enter pediatrics as a specialty. So I spent about 10 years kind of floating around, and then when we moved to Denver, I was able to then focus on pediatrics, and this was after I had my first son. My husband didn't really understand my need to work with children. He's like, you have a child. Like, isn't that enough? But I really feel drawn. Right. Yeah. No, it's not. I really feel drawn to working with kids. I think on one level it's fun. Like, I get to be silly and I get to sing songs and play games. So on that level, it's, very just lighthearted. But at the same time, neurology is so interesting to me. The way that our brain works, the way that our brains and our bodies are interconnected, that's undeniable. And the research is now coming out more and more about gut bacteria and how that affects our brain and our mood. And I think just like thinking about it conceptually, yes, why wouldn't that be the case? And I think that in the Western medicine world, and just in Western culture in general, we pride ourselves in thinking that our bodies and brains are actually separate, that I can do something with my body even though my brain is telling me no, or kind of giving me warning signals that this is dangerous, or I'm not comfortable with this, that I can will myself past that. Or in school, that you can use your wizard brain, don't rely on your lizard brain. And I think that that's kind of dangerous and kind of not being actually very responsible, because those warning systems, that lizard brain that we have, is actually very important. And if we ignore that, we are missing out on so much information. And so this was a process that I've gone through, like, first and foremost for myself. So I have always acknowledged that I have been a little bit more immature emotionally. So when I was younger, I would cry at everything. And it didn't really matter. I was just crying all the time, and I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't tell you how I was feeling. One of the most profound examples was I cried at everything, especially in school. But my best friend's mother died of a brain aneurysm at 16 when my best friend and I were 16. And I went to the funeral, and I didn't cry. And I didn't know why at the time, but I had this, like, feeling of, what's wrong with me? Why am I not like physically showing how sad I am right now. I cry over everything else. But that was like a wake-up call, again, not like maybe something that I acknowledged exactly what was going on, but that this crying is more of a reaction. It's not really understanding a feeling or being attuned to how I'm feeling. I'm just reacting to the situation and feeling overwhelmed, and that's the crying was just my way of getting that out. So fast forward through school and through life and realizing that actually I have a pretty anxious attachment style, and it doesn't take very long for me to reach that threshold where I shut down, I freeze. And I couldn't understand that either. And the more I did about reading and learned about attachment styles and learned about different love languages and all of that, I realized what all of this meant. And then learning about the MNR Eye, that stands for Masatova, which is the woman's name who developed this system, Neuromuscular reflex integration, understanding that all of us, and all beings really, not just humans, but especially humans, from about 11 weeks of gestation for human beings, we begin with these primary movements, as well as we develop these primary reflexes that help us keep safe and survive, but also lay the foundation for more advanced, more coordinated movements, thoughts, emotions, sensory awareness. And as I started learning more about how that works scientifically, it made a whole lot of sense of what I experienced myself. And even just thinking about like the practice of yoga. So, 2,000 years ago, the writings of yoga and the 8 limbs of yoga, it's not just about the asanas, but how this all fits together, and how it's not just about like what you learn, but it's also about your experience. So thinking about that and thinking about, well, what if your experience is kind of clouded, or your vision of what is happening really isn't what's happening? Like, where does that go? And what about the kids that I work with who aren't verbal yet, or even some of the adults that I work with who don't have words to explain how they're feeling, and yet they go into these same protective responses. So how does this all fit and relate to each other? And so I kind of come up with this 4-tier system of thinking about like our capacities as human beings, and kind of molding all of this together. And it does truly begin with the reflexes. So whether if you're an adult and you find it hard for you to deal with certain situations, or you find it hard to tolerate certain tastes or smells or sounds or whatever, like, we are sensory beings. We learn information from our environment, and we learn it 10 different ways. And if we're thrown out of a state of calm and alert, we're no longer able to listen or learn. We're right back into that reflex pattern of protection and survival. And you can't do both at the same time. You can't grow or learn and protect and survive. You're either doing one or the other. And so really what we want to be doing, no matter what stage of life or what you're working on, is to keep yourself in that state of calm and alert, and keep yourself in a state of being able to accept information from your external environment as well as your internal environment, your hormones, the neurotransmitters, and allow that to keep moving you forward toward whatever goal you have. But also just kind of being able to be reflective about, okay, when I'm not feeling safe, acknowledging that and seeing, when you're in the thick of it, when you're like in the middle of the forest, you can't see the forest from the trees, it's hard to find the right answer. It's hard to find your way out. And Marie Forleo has an example of a flashlight. Like, if you're looking at that flashlight yourself, you can't turn it. You can't see your path because you're like staring at the flashlight. But if you turn that flashlight outward and focus it outward of yourself onto some other situation or some other person, you often will then be able to see your path. And I think that's, really powerful if you are feeling stuck right now. Kind of thinking about what you would tell a friend in this situation, because that creates some space between you and the situation. Now it's not about you, it's about your friend. And are you able to find the answer more quickly that way? I do that all the time. I'll talk with my families that I work with in pediatric therapy about a solution to the problem that they're having with their child. And I think to myself as I go home that night, oh my gosh, that's the answer of what I need to do for my kid right now. And I just came up with that answer, and I couldn't do it for myself 2 days ago when I was having the same problem. But here it just flowed out of my mouth as I'm talking to this parent. So I think I really feel, and I'm sure you also agree with this, that we have the answers within us. We just need to get ourselves in that calm and alert state so that we can see it or feel it. So.
And then that brings in the conversation of people that are more highly empathic, people that have different spiritual psychic abilities. How is that? Is it recognized? And of course, there's I feel like different levels for different people. And even when you were speaking, I was thinking about some of my friends, like who are like kind of ADD or have like obsessive compulsive issues, or just where, it'd be interesting to see how they could integrate, like where did that come from? Was it when they were younger, and how are they like in the world now? And even our children, looking at our children and seeing, it's so, I want to say it's easy, but I feel like it's always about the child, like, the diagnosis of something, but also I know energetically when I'm tuning into people, I've noticed in the past year with the medical intuitive stuff that I can tell if people have what I would call sensory issues. It's kind of what I call it, because I'm like, wow, they're more than empathic. They actually have a sensory to the world, like maybe it's to their skin, maybe it's the way their feet touch the ground, maybe it's the electromagnetic energy around them. And it's not everybody, but I noticed that. And I remember this one woman from Australia, when I was really bringing that forward, it was so clear. And she was like, oh my gosh, like I never thought of it that way, because, she coped and she found different ways around it to kind of be a part of the world. But it was very hard. And she brought it to her husband, and her husband was like, from the session, and he was freaking out going, oh my gosh, that's what you have. That's what it is. It's a sensory issue. Like otherwise it was like, oh, something's wrong with you. You're overly sensitive, but it's like, no, it's a sensory, we do have sensory issues being born into the world from that infancy, from that womb space. And it's so different. And even when you were talking, I was thinking about my older brother, who I know was Asperger's, never diagnosed, and he's passed away now. But he had such sensory issues, like swimming with socks on, and he's kind of like quirky, and he had all these weird rituals. But I realized, my gosh, the world was so loud, and nobody knew that for him. It makes me kind of sad, actually. Because I was the one at some point, a behavioral therapist, when I told her about my brother, she goes, you were like his therapist without realizing it, because I didn't have his sensory issues. And I did. I took him, got his first girlfriend. I got him like out in the world in so many ways. I was like, we were very close in age too, and we were close when we were little. And something really shifted as he became a teenager. And so, but it was interesting to see how as adults, nobody, like, all of a sudden, it's like a kid thing. Do you hear that? It's like, oh, it's a kid thing to have sensory issues. Then you're an adult, like, well, what does that mean? It's still there.
Yes.
Maybe we're manageable.
Yeah. This is true, and you don't grow out of these things. My mother, who's 65, she's 65, and she still can't have people touching her. She doesn't enjoy that. But so we'll go back a little bit here. Is there something, Kelly, that you really don't tolerate? A taste? Is there something that you absolutely hate? A texture, a sound, something that really irritates you?
That's a really good example. What is it? Oh, I don't know. Like, what really irritates me? My husband? No. No. Okay, that's a whole other episode. Yeah, I know, right. I'm trying to think, like, I don't know, because I think of my brother, like, he couldn't be hugged. He couldn't be hugged either. He didn't like hugs. It was, like, too much. A flavor, I don't like steak. I don't like the way it smells. I don't like the way it tastes. No.
So if I made you, I'm going to force you to eat steak every day, every meal, every day. How does that make you feel right now? So
angry in my heart. Angry. Yeah. Pissed off.
So right now we're going from the top. Sure, we're going from the top down. You have had experience with steak. So as adults or older children, we've had experiences that we can draw from. That's by virtue of our hippocampus. But nonetheless, that creates a sensory experience within your body without actually even having to taste the steak. So you know that if you were forced to eat steak every day of your life, of every meal, you're not going to eventually like steak. That right now, that sensory stimulus of the smell of the steak, the texture of the steak, is going past your threshold and giving you a sensation of you're unsafe. So when we talk about, making our children do it because eventually they're going to like it, that's not the case if we are putting them in a state of protection, if we're moving them out of calm and alert. Now, if it's something that's really important that the child must eat steak every day because this is the food that we have, I would need to go down to the level that the child was able to maintain their state of calm and alert so that we could begin to experience this and still feel safe. And that's where MNR Eye comes in, because I can help directly improve this, whatever primary reflex is going on that is not allowing the sensory experience to make sense to the child or to the adult. We can work at that level specifically so that we can start to allow that sensory experience to feel safe to you. There's about 25 different primary reflexes that at one point they served a purpose, that if we're still getting hit to that threshold, whether it's a taste, a sound, a texture, whatever, and it's throwing us into the state of protection, that's not allowing us to move forward in our world safely or being able to learn. So, and this is no different. I mean, we try to override this as well-educated or adults. We try to dissociate our brains from our bodies, our nervous system from, and that's, I'm telling you, that's not okay. We have 10 different senses, I think, and perhaps maybe there's even more. The animal kingdom, if you're a shark, you have, some extra sensory, but these are senses that all of us as humans have. Now, whether we're listening to them or whether we're perceiving accurately what the senses are telling us, that's a different situation. So steak, Kelly, there's nothing wrong with steak. Steak is safe. The texture of steak is not really dangerous to you. But that's not your perception right now. So anyway, so that's kind of like how I'm seeing the world right now. No, that's a good example.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, because then if you're looking at a child, who doesn't have a reference yet for that, and then their maturity of their cognitive and brain's development is so different. And I know when I worked with as an infant early intervention and an infant development specialist, I remember learning 0 to 3. It's like a lot of parents didn't really understand that, because we have a different brain that we come in with and an expectation. And I've seen that even with a lot of parenting, and I feel really thankful. And I didn't feel like I was super specialized in brain cognitive development, but I realized a lot around how it's hard to understand an infant or a toddler at certain times, and how to accept that, how they develop and where their sensitivity is, or if they have maybe either other problems. As I've shared that my son had speech issues, and I was like, what am I doing with this? I don't know. How do I make it so he can communicate in a way that's easy, and then where he doesn't feel disempowered even by his, what feels like a limitation, because quote unquote, it's not the norm. And but then I go, okay, Kelly, you've never lived in the norm, so how are you now, gonna like kind of teach him to see the world in a certain way and use his other skills and senses without feeling like he has to force. I felt like for me, I was forced to go, you have to learn their way. And I couldn't, and I tried and I couldn't. And year after year, no one was like, okay, maybe you should learn your way. Let's teach you your way and you'll be good. But I had to have a lot of, I guess we'll say, trial and error to be nice about it. A lot of failing and achieving. But I feel like, just that's so great, the MNR Eye and all this stuff. I feel like when you were talking, and you may laugh about this or not, I was like, she's like a saint. I was like, there's some energy about you. It's like all the children are like coming in so many different levels, not just into your life as your family, but into your world. Just like you're like the magnet of like helping sensitive beings and infants and parents in certain ways. And it's actually quite beautiful and amazing. And I'm so glad that what you do and the energy of your work and have allowed you to be there. And it's not like, again.
The moderator has left the conference.
So sorry about that. I'm going to have to delete that out. My phone dropped. You're still there, right?
Oh, I'm still here. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, because I'm going to have to go back and delete it because it's going to say the moderator left. It's okay. As I was saying was talking about, just the work that you're doing and how beautiful and helpful it is. And I'm really glad that, not that you've had hardship, but you've had hardship. And you've seen just the different, expansive, really pieces of life, of creation. And then now, I love your excitement because I can hear your excitement for learning new things and how you're integrating that into the services that you provide. But we're just kind of coming to the end, but I would love for you to share maybe your website. I know we talked earlier, even about your podcast, what that's about and how people can find they can tune in and listen.
Sure. We can do that. I think the podcast is useful. For sure. So my podcast is called Dyslexically Successful, and I myself am a dyslexic learner, although I didn't realize that I was until I was about 34 years old when my oldest son was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so through the experience of him having difficulties in school and understanding how to read, I then did some research on what that might be and came across dyslexia and realized that all the struggles that I had in school and the anxiety that I felt around learning was because of my own dyslexia. And I was not ever remediated, and yet I was able to graduate third in my high school class and went on to get my master's degree. And how much work I had to do and how much effort I had to put in, and just kind of had to come to terms with that I do learn differently. And I just thought that I was a kinesthetic learner. But really what it was because of my poor phonemic awareness, I wasn't able to really understand well, and then that went into not being able to read and comprehend well what was going on. So since those senses were a little bit down, I think that helped heighten my intuitive sense. So I think we see this a lot. If someone's blind, their vision may not be giving them very good information about their environment, but what does their body do naturally? It heightens some other sense, whether it's the sense of smell or perhaps hearing. You think about someone like Stevie Wonder, who is blind, but yet has this incredible ability to play music. So I think naturally when something is working under par, our bodies overcompensate with another area. And, talking about briefly that our 10 senses that I acknowledge, 5 external senses and 5 internal senses, one of them being your intuition. And I do think that everybody has it. But again, just like your sense of taste for steak is not, you don't like that, so you avoid eating steak. So you don't really develop an improved taste for steak. So if someone doesn't like the way that their intuitive sense is telling them, or it's perceived in a negative way, you're not going to really hone those skills and hone that ability to perceive the world that way. And I think that is my strength, and I attribute that. I say I have a podcast, the Successful Podcast, because I want people to understand that even though you're dyslexic, or even though you might have a neurodiverse brain, so it could be ADHD or autism, that is the label that you're being given, that you have a different way of thinking, that should be celebrated, and your successes are not in spite of those differences, but they are because of it. And I, over the past 4 years especially, have really owned that I'm not afraid to say I'm dyslexic. It's right there on my LinkedIn profile. It is who I am. I am a dyslexic learner. And yeah, that might mean that I'm not going to take in information from my environment the same way. I'm not going to learn as much reading with my eyes, but I do learn incredibly well listening. And so that if I really wanted to get better at reading with my eyes, I would have to work at it. But then I guess I choose to work on the things that come a little bit easier for me, and kind of listen to those things. And that still is allowing me to meet my needs and serve myself and my family. So, Dyslexically Successful, I interview people who are adult dyslexic learners who have followed a similar path of struggle in school, that have learned whatever their dyslexic strengths are, and because of that, they've gone on to be successful in their life, whatever that might mean for them. And I just really want to kind of share that story for the other people who maybe aren't sure quite yet what their dyslexic strengths are, or if they have children who are dyslexic or with autism or other issues that they're struggling with right now, that they can know that things do get better, that people do find their way, and that we as parents, as community partners, can help support them through this and really help them identify where their strengths lie.
So wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom.
Of course, yeah. And if you guys wanted to find my podcast, it's on like 8 different outlets, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify. So you can just search Dyslexically Successful. It's the only one that has that silly word in it.
I love it. It makes sense. Well, thank you again for joining episode 88, May 1st, 2020, The Journey of Motherhood from Birthing Life to Birth Loss Surrogacy, a Real Life Story.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.